The dust whipped across the endless Nevada plains as Grace Zimmerman clutched her meager possessions, trudging along the rutted trail that led away from Tonopah Junction. Behind her, the silhouettes of those who had condemned her grew smaller with each step, but their words still cut deeper than the fierce wind that tore at her shawl. Banished, ostracized, cast out for the simple crime of loving a man others had deemed unworthy. It was 1878, and the small mining settlement of Tonopah Junction was still finding its footing in the harsh Nevada territory. Grace had arrived just 2 years prior, a 20-year-old schoolteacher from Boston with dreams of bringing education to the frontier. What she hadn't anticipated was falling deeply in love with Samuel Blackstone, the half-Mexican, half-Irish miner whose gentle ways and profound intelligence had captured her heart, despite the town's cruel prejudice. "You're dead to us now," Mayor Higsworth had declared that morning, the town council nodding in solemn agreement. "No decent woman consorts with their kind. Pack your things and be gone by sundown." She had no tears left. 3 days of weeping had dried the well of her sorrow, leaving only a hollow ache and uncertain future. The nearest town was over 20 miles away, and night was falling fast. Grace knew the desert turned merciless after dark. The first stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky when she spotted the flicker of a campfire in the distance. Hope and fear battled within her. A traveler might offer assistance, or something far worse. With no real alternative, Grace adjusted her path toward the light. As she drew closer, she made out the shape of a man tending the fire, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the flames. A horse nickered softly from the darkness, and the man turned at the sound, hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "Who's there?" His voice carried clear and steady across the desert evening. "Just a traveler," Grace called back, her voice rough from thirst and exhaustion. "A woman alone, I mean no harm." The figure relaxed slightly but remained watchful. "Come into the light, madam." Grace stepped forward, her legs trembling from the day's journey. The firelight revealed a man perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denims, a faded blue shirt, and a dust-covered hat that he respectfully removed as she approached. "My name is Archer Daniels," he said, studying her with a careful gaze. "You're a far piece from anywhere, Miss Grace," she replied, swaying slightly. "Grace Zimmerman." She might have said more, but exhaustion finally claimed its due. The world tilted sideways, and as darkness closed in, she was dimly aware of strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. When Grace awoke, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. A blanket had been carefully tucked around her, and a saddle served as her pillow. Across the rekindled fire, the man Archer was brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. "Good morning," he said, noticing her stirring. "Thought you might sleep clear through to noon." "You were more worn out than a cavalry horse after an Apache chase." Grace sat up slowly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I apologize for imposing on your camp, Mr. Daniels." "Archer," he corrected, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her, "and there's no imposition. Desert's no place for anyone to be wandering alone, especially a lady. Mind telling me what brings you out here with nothing but that small bag?" She hesitated, then decided that the truth, however shameful in Tonopah Junction, was all she had left. "I've been banished, cast out for loving someone the town deemed unsuitable." Archer's expression remained unchanged as he poured his own coffee. "That's so," he said quietly. "And what made this man so unsuitable?" "His heritage," Grace replied, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "Samuel was half Mexican, half Irish. A fine man, educated, kind, but the town couldn't see past the color of his skin." Her voice caught. "He died in a mining accident 3 weeks ago, and yesterday they decided I no longer belonged among decent folk." Archer was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as though divining something from its depths. When he finally spoke, his words caught her by surprise. You loved true, that's no sin, he said simply. Those folks back in town, they're the sinners, judging what they don't understand. A tear slipped down Grace's cheek, the first she'd been able to shed since leaving Tanapa Junction. Thank you for that kindness, sir, but kind words won't change my predicament. Where were you headed? Archer asked, beginning to pack up his camp. Hawthorne, I suppose. It's the next town of any size. I'm a schoolteacher by training. Perhaps they need one. Archer nodded, his movements efficient as he saddled his chestnut gelding. Hawthorne's a good 3 days' ride from here. I'm headed in that direction myself. He turned to face her squarely. Miss Zimmerman, I'd be honored to escort you there safely. Grace studied him, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one night than Tanapa Junction had in weeks. Why would you help me? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Because decent folk don't leave others to the mercy of the desert, no matter what some town council might think. He extended his hand to help her up. What do you say? She took his hand, surprising herself with the decision. I accept your offer, Mr. Daniels. Archer, he corrected again, helping her onto his horse before gathering the reins to lead them forward. And your Samuel was right to love you, Miss Zimmerman. Those fools back in that town will realize their mistake someday. They traveled steadily through the morning, Archer walking alongside the horse while Grace rode. Though she protested this arrangement several times, he insisted it was no hardship for a man accustomed to covering long distances on foot. Been driving cattle since I was 16, he explained, his stride never faltering despite the uneven ground. Walking's just another part of living out here. As the sun climbed higher, Grace learned that Archer was 32, born in Missouri but raised throughout the Western Territories as his father sought ranch work. He'd fought briefly in the latter days of the Civil War, though he spoke little of that time. For the past decade, he'd worked as a cowhand, ranch manager, and occasionally as a guide for those traversing the territories. And what brings you to Nevada? Grace asked as they paused in the meager shade of a solitary juniper to eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. Archer's face grew somber. My brother Thomas sent for me. He has a small ranch near Hawthorne. His letter said he was in some kind of trouble, though he didn't specify what kind. You're close with your brother, Archer corrected, a shadow passing over his features. Haven't seen him in nearly 8 years. We disagreed about some things after the war, but blood's blood. When he wrote saying he needed help, I didn't hesitate. Grace nodded, understanding family loyalty even when strained. That's admirable. Not really, Archer said with a self-deprecating smile. Just what brothers do. He looked westward, gauging the afternoon sun. We should reach Cooper's Creek by nightfall. There's a small trading post there where we can rest properly. They resumed their journey, the vast Nevada landscape stretching endlessly around them. Grace found herself studying her companion when he wasn't looking the way he moved with quiet confidence, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the gentle way he treated both her and his horse. There was a steadiness to Archer Daniels that she found comforting amid the chaos her life had become. As promised, they reached Cooper's Creek by early evening. The trading post was little more than a sturdy log building with a small stable attached, but after a day in the saddle, it looked like a palace to Grace. The proprietor, a gruff older man named Elijah Cooper, raised an eyebrow at the sight of a travel-worn woman in the company of a cowboy, but asked no questions beyond whether they needed 1 room or 2. 2, Archer answered firmly, counting out coins from a leather pouch. And hot water for the lady, if possible. To Grace's immense relief, Mrs. Cooper appeared from the back room and took charge, showing her to a small but clean room and providing a tub of steaming water along with a bar of lye soap. Don't often see a proper lady out these ways, the older woman remarked, eyeing Grace's worn but once fine dress. Your husband seems a decent sort, though. Mr. Daniels is merely escorting me to Hawthorne, Grace corrected, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. We only met yesterday, Mrs. Cooper's eyebrows shot upward. Is that so? Well, ain't my business what brings folks together on the trail. She laid out a clean towel. Supper's in an hour, nothing fancy, just venison stew and biscuits. After the older woman left, Grace sank gratefully into the bath, letting the warm water soothe her aching muscles. Her mind drifted to Archer, to his unexpected kindness, and the strength that seemed to radiate from him. It was too soon, far too soon, to feel anything beyond gratitude toward another man. Samuel's memory was still raw, his absence a constant ache. Yet something about Archer Daniels made her feel safe for the first time since losing Samuel. Perhaps it was merely the relief of finding help when she'd expected to face the journey alone. Whatever it was, she silently thanked Providence for placing him in her path. When Grace descended for supper, she found Archer in conversation with a weathered rancher at one of the rough wooden tables. He rose immediately upon seeing her, and something flickered in his expression as he took in her appearance, hair neatly pinned, face freshly scrubbed, wearing the cleanest of her travel-worn dresses. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, pulling out a chair for her, "you look rested." "The wonders of hot water and soap," she replied with a small smile, noticing how his own hair was damp from washing, his face clean-shaven. The rancher, introduced as Harold Whitman, proved to be a wealth of information about the area. As they ate Mrs. Cooper's hearty stew, he spoke of conditions in Hawthorne and the surrounding ranches. "Town's growing decent enough," Whitman explained between bites. "Got themselves a school building last year, but the teacher they hired didn't last a month before heading back east. Said our children were too wild to tame." He chuckled at the memory. Grace exchanged a quick glance with Archer. "They're still without a teacher?" she asked. "Far as I know, place has been sitting empty since winter." Whitman studied her with new interest. "You got teaching experience, madam?" "5 years in Boston, and nearly 2 in Tonopah Junction," she replied. The rancher nodded approvingly. "Hawthorne Town Council would likely snatch you up faster than a hawk on a field mouse. They're desperate to show the territory governor they're civilized enough for proper recognition." For the first time since being cast out, Grace felt a spark of genuine hope. If she could secure a teaching position in Hawthorne, she might rebuild her life after all. "Speaking of Hawthorne," Whitman continued, turning to Archer, "you mentioned your brother Thomas has a spread near there." Archer nodded. "The Diamond D bought it about 6 years back, according to his letters." Whitman's expression darkened slightly. "Daniels. Wait, Thomas Daniels, tall fella, scar across his jaw, that's him," Archer confirmed, suddenly alert. "You know my brother?" The rancher shifted uncomfortably. "Know of him. There's been trouble out at the Diamond D lately." He lowered his voice. "Your brother's been feuding with the Caldwell outfit over water rights to Silverheel Creek. Turned ugly a couple months back when one of the Caldwell hands was shot. Some say Thomas did it." Grace watched Archer's face harden, his jaw tightening at this news. "Thomas wouldn't shoot a man without cause," he said firmly. "Maybe so," Whitman conceded, "but the Caldwells are powerful in these parts. They've been pressuring the sheriff to make an arrest." He pushed his empty bowl aside. "If you're heading to the Diamond D, you'd best watch your back. That feud's got everybody choosing sides." Later that evening, as Grace sat on the trading post's small porch watching the stars emerge, Archer joined her, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry if Mr. Whitman's news about your brother concerns you," Grace offered after a moment of silence. Archer sighed, leaning against a post. "Thomas always did have a talent for finding trouble, but shooting a man, that doesn't sound like him." "People change," Grace said softly, thinking of how Tonopah Junction's friendly neighbors had transformed into her judges and executioners. "That they do," Archer agreed, his gaze moving from the stars to her face. "May I ask about him, Samuel?" The question caught her off guard, but something in Archer's tone made it impossible to take offense. "What would you like to know? Whatever you'd care to share. Seems to me a love worth being banished for is a love worth remembering." Grace looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "Samuel came to Tonopah Junction to work the silver mines. He was educated, had studied engineering in San Francisco, but mining companies wouldn't hire a Mexican-Irish man as an engineer, only as labor. She smiled faintly at the memory. He used to borrow books from the school library. That's how we met. He had the most beautiful way of looking at the world, finding wonder in places others saw only dirt and rock. How long were you together? 10 months. We kept it secret at first. When we finally told people, the reaction was mixed. Some tolerated it, others were openly hostile. The mine owner threatened to fire Samuel unless I ended things. Grace's voice grew tight. We were planning to leave, to start fresh somewhere else. Then the cave-in happened. Archer was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "The worst part wasn't losing him," Grace whispered. "It was that they wouldn't even let me attend his funeral properly. I had to watch from a distance as they buried him in the section reserved for foreigners and Indians." Anger flashed through her grief. As if he wasn't good enough even in death. Without thinking, Archer reached out and covered her clasped hands with his own. Their cruelty speaks to their character, not his worth or yours. His hand was warm, calloused from years of work, yet his touch was gentle. For a brief moment, Grace allowed herself to draw comfort from the contact before gently withdrawing her hands. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Few have wanted to hear about Samuel since his death." "Their loss," Archer replied simply, standing up. "We should rest. It's another long day of riding tomorrow." As Grace prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself thinking not of the past, but of the uncertain future that lay ahead. For the first time since Samuel's death, that future didn't seem entirely bleak. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for traveling. Archer had already arranged for supplies and negotiated the purchase of a gentle mare for Grace from Mr. Cooper, refusing her protests about the expense. "Consider it a loan," he insisted. "Once you're settled in Hawthorne with a teaching position, you can repay me." "And if there is no position?" Grace asked as they set out, the trading post shrinking behind them. "Then we'll figure something else out," Archer replied with such easy confidence that she couldn't help but believe him. They rode side by side now, making better time with 2 horses. The landscape began to change subtly as they traveled westward, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with sage and rabbit brush. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains rose in jagged silhouette against the horizon. "It's beautiful in its own way," Grace observed, watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. "The desert grows on you," Archer agreed. "Took me a while to appreciate it after the green forests of Missouri, but now I can't imagine calling anywhere else home." "Do you have a home?" she asked. "A permanent one, I mean," he shook his head. "Not since my parents passed, been moving from ranch to ranch, season to season. Thomas is the one who wanted to put down roots, that's why he bought the Diamond D." "And you never wanted that, a place of your own?" Archer was quiet for several paces. "Wanted it, yes, but wanting and having are different things. After the war, it was easier to keep moving." Grace sensed there was more to this story, but she didn't press. Everyone carried wounds that were slow to heal, she understood that better than most. They camped that night beside a small spring, hidden among a stand of cottonwoods. After a simple meal of beans and salt pork, they sat by the fire, sharing stories of their lives before their paths had crossed. Grace told him of Boston, of her decision to venture west after her parents' deaths left her with few ties to the city of her birth. "I wanted adventure," she admitted, "but I also wanted purpose. Teaching in these territories felt like both." "You've got courage," Archer observed. "Most Boston ladies I've encountered out here are weeping for home within a week." Grace laughed, the sound surprising her. "Oh, I did my share of weeping that first month in Tonopah Junction. The heat, the dust, the interesting aromas of a mining town." She wrinkled her nose at the memory. "But then I met my students' children who'd never held a book before, whose parents couldn't read or write. Watching them learn, seeing that spark when they first understood something new," she smiled. "That made everything else worthwhile." "You'll be a fine addition to Hawthorne," Archer said with certainty. "If they'll have me," Grace replied. "A woman cast out of one town may not be welcomed in another." Archer's gaze was steady across the flickering flames. "Your only crime was loving someone others didn't approve of. That's their shame, not yours." The simplicity of his statement, the absolute conviction behind it, touched something deep within Grace. "You have an unusual perspective for a man of the frontier, Mr. Daniels." "Archer," he reminded her with a small smile. "And maybe I've just seen enough real sins to know the difference between them and what people merely call sin." Later, as Grace lay wrapped in her blanket looking up at the vast canopy of stars, she found herself thinking of Archer's words. In the 3 days since meeting him, he'd shown more understanding than people she'd known for years in Tanapa Junction. There was a decency to him, an integrity that seemed to run bone deep. It was too soon to call what she felt anything other than gratitude and perhaps the beginnings of friendship. Yet she couldn't deny the comfort his presence brought, or the way her heart seemed lighter in his company. They reached the outskirts of Hawthorne shortly before noon on the 3rd day. The town was considerably larger than Tanapa Junction, boasting several streets of wooden buildings, including a proper church with a small steeple, a 2-story hotel, and various businesses serving the surrounding ranching community. As they rode down the main street, Grace noticed the schoolhouse Whitman had mentioned, a neat white building standing slightly apart from the town center. Several children played in the yard despite the absence of classes, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Looks promising," Archer commented, following her gaze. "We should inquire at the town hall about the teaching position." The town clerk, a thin man named Peterson, nearly leapt from his chair when Grace mentioned her teaching credentials. "Providence itself must have sent you, Miss Zimmerman. The town council has been desperate to find a qualified instructor before harvest season ends." Within an hour, Grace found herself before 3 members of the town council, answering questions about her education and teaching experience. To her relief, they seemed far more interested in her ability to manage a classroom of 30 children than in her personal history. "The position comes with lodging," explained Councilman Barton, a barrel-chested man with impressive mutton chop whiskers. "Small but serviceable rooms above the schoolhouse. Previous salary was $40 monthly, paid through the town treasury. It was less than she'd earned in Tanapa Junction, but with housing provided, it would be sufficient." "When would you wish me to begin?" Grace asked. "Yesterday if possible," Councilman Barton replied with a hearty laugh. "But realistically, could you be ready by Monday next? Give you time to settle in and prepare." "I believe I could, yes." The council members exchanged pleased glances. "Then pending a formal vote at tomorrow's meeting, which I assure you is merely a formality, consider yourself Hawthorne's new schoolteacher, Miss Zimmerman." Outside the town hall, Archer was waiting with both horses. "Judging by your expression, I'd say Hawthorne has a new teacher," he said with a smile. "Pending tomorrow's vote, yes." Grace couldn't contain her relief. "I can hardly believe it happened so quickly." "They recognize quality when they see it," Archer replied. "Now, I need to locate the sheriff's office to inquire about my brother's situation." Grace hesitated. "Would you like me to accompany you? I appreciate the offer, but this may involve some uncomfortable conversations. Let me get you settled at the hotel first." The Hawthorne Hotel was modest but clean, with actual glass windows and carpet in the lobby, luxuries that spoke to the town's growing prosperity. After arranging a room for Grace, Archer promised to return for supper. "I need to understand what my brother's involved in before I head out to his ranch," he explained. "Might take a few hours." Left alone for the first time in days, Grace took advantage of the hotel's bathing facilities and changed into her last clean dress. As she brushed out her hair, she found herself wondering about Archer's brother and the trouble he faced. If the Caldwells were as influential as Whitman had suggested, Thomas Daniels might be in serious danger. More concerning was what this might mean for Archer. He'd come to help his estranged brother, only to potentially walk into a violent feud. The thought of him facing such danger made her stomach tighten with worry. When Archer hadn't returned by sunset, Grace ventured down to the hotel dining room alone. She was halfway through a surprisingly decent meal of roast chicken when he finally appeared, his expression grave as he took the seat opposite her. "I apologize for the delay," he said, his voice low. "The situation with Thomas is worse than I anticipated." Grace pushed her plate aside. "What did you discover?" "The sheriff confirmed there's a warrant for Thomas's arrest for the shooting of a Caldwell Ranch hand, but there's more to it." Archer leaned forward, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "According to a deputy who's sympathetic to Thomas, the Caldwells have been systematically forcing smaller ranchers off their land by controlling access to water. Thomas organized the smaller ranchers to resist, and the shooting, the deputy believes it was self-defense. The Caldwell hand was trespassing on Thomas's property, armed, but with the Caldwell's influence, Thomas hasn't dared come to town to give his side of the story." Grace frowned. "That hardly seems like justice." "Justice is often whatever the powerful decide it is," Archer replied grimly. "I need to ride out to the Diamond D tomorrow, talk to Thomas directly. Will you be safe? If the Caldwells are watching his property, I'll be careful." He reached across the table to briefly touch her hand. "Grace, I want to thank you for your company these past days. Meeting you was..." He searched for the right words, unexpected, but "I'm grateful our paths crossed." There was a finality to his tone that made her heart sink. "You sound as though you're saying goodbye." "I don't know what I'll be riding into tomorrow." Thomas's letter suggested real danger. His eyes held hers steadily. "You found a place here, a new beginning. I wouldn't forgive myself if my family troubles interfered with that." "Archer," Grace said softly, "you helped me when no one else would. At least let me know you're safe after you visit your brother." A small smile touched his lips. "I promise to return to Hawthorne, whatever happens, but don't wait for me, Grace. Your new life is starting here." That night, sleep eluded Grace. Her mind kept returning to Archer, to the quiet strength that had sustained her through their journey, to the understanding in his eyes when he'd said those words that had begun to heal something broken inside her. "You loved true, that's no sin." In just a few days, he'd become important to her in ways she hadn't expected. The thought of him riding into danger alone troubled her deeply. Yet what could she do? She was a schoolteacher with a new position, not someone who could help in a range war between powerful ranchers. At dawn, Grace heard the sound of hoofbeats outside her window. Looking down, she saw Archer mounting his gelding, his rifle secured in its scabbard, saddlebags bulging with supplies. For a moment he glanced up at the hotel, and though she wasn't sure he could see her, Grace raised her hand in farewell. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then turned his horse westward, toward the Diamond D Ranch and whatever awaited him there. The day passed slowly for Grace. She met with the town council, who unanimously confirmed her appointment as Hawthorne's schoolteacher. She was given keys to the schoolhouse and the small apartment above it, along with the school register showing 34 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. By afternoon, she had moved her few belongings into her new home and begun planning lessons for the coming week. The work was a welcome distraction, but her thoughts kept drifting to Archer, wondering if he'd reached his brother's ranch safely. As evening approached, Grace was arranging books on the schoolroom shelves when she heard riders approaching. Looking out the window, she saw 3 men on horseback stop outside the schoolhouse. One dismounted and approached the door. The knock was firm but not threatening. Still, Grace's heart raced as she opened the door. Miss Zimmerman. The man was middle-aged with a weather-beaten face and clear blue eyes. "I'm Sheriff Taylor. May I have a word?" "Of course," Grace replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is something wrong?" The sheriff removed his hat as he stepped inside. "I understand you arrived in town with Archer Daniels." "That's correct. He escorted me from near Tonopah Junction." "Do you know where he was headed today?" Grace hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He mentioned visiting his brother's ranch. The Diamond D, I believe. The sheriff nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. Miss Zimmerman, there's been trouble out at the Diamond D. Gunfire was reported by a passing rider about 2 hours ago. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Is he hurt? I don't know. I'm gathering men to ride out there now. The sheriff studied her face for a moment. You care for him, don't you? He saved my life, Grace said simply. Please, when you learn something. I'll send word, the sheriff promised, but it might be late tonight or tomorrow before we know anything. After the sheriff left, Grace found it impossible to focus on her lesson preparations. She paced the small apartment, imagining the worst scenarios. Had Archer been injured, killed, and what if his brother Thomas, Knight, had fallen when Grace heard another knock at the schoolhouse door? Her hands trembling, she lit a lamp and hurried downstairs. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the yellow lamplight, was Archer. His left arm was bound in a makeshift sling, and a darkening bruise marked his right cheekbone, but he was alive. Archer. Grace exclaimed, nearly dropping the lamp in her relief. The sheriff said there was trouble. May I come in? He asked, his voice weary. Grace stepped aside, noticing now that there was a second man behind Archer, taller, with similar features but a harder expression and a distinctive scar across his jaw. Thomas Daniels. Once inside, Archer sank gratefully into a chair while his brother remained standing, alert and watchful near the window. What happened? Grace asked, setting the lamp on her desk. The Caldwells decided today was a good day to force the issue, Archer explained. 6 of their men rode onto the Diamond D, armed and looking for Thomas. I arrived just as they were surrounding the house. Damn lucky timing, Thomas interjected, his voice rougher than his brother's. They weren't expecting 2 Daniels boys instead of 1. There was a standoff, Archer continued, words exchanged. When they tried to force their way inside, shots were fired. He gestured to his injured arm. Bullet grazed me, nothing serious. 2 of Caldwell's men weren't so lucky, Thomas added without remorse. Nothing fatal, but they'll be nursing their wounds for a while. Grace looked between the brothers, understanding dawning. You're fugitives now, Archer nodded wearily. The Caldwells will claim we ambushed their men. With their influence, the territorial marshal might believe them. Sheriff Taylor is riding out there now, Grace said. He seemed fair. Taylor's a good man, Thomas agreed, but even he can only do so much against the Caldwells' money and connections. He turned to his brother. We need to keep moving. That posse could be heading back to town any minute. Archer stood slowly, wincing at the movement. Thomas is right. We need to get to Carson City. There's a territorial judge there who's known for actually listening to both sides of a dispute. Grace felt a strange sense of déjà vu once again, watching someone she cared for prepare to leave, possibly forever. When will you return? When it's safe, Archer replied, his eyes meeting hers. Grace, he glanced at his brother, then back to her. Thomas, give us a minute. The older Daniels nodded and stepped outside, leaving them alone in the lamplight. I had hoped to return under better circumstances, Archer said softly, to properly court you if you were willing. Grace's heart quickened at his words. You want to court me? From the moment I found you in the desert, something told me you were special. He moved closer, his good hand gently taking hers. I know it's too soon after Samuel. I know we've known each other only days, but sometimes life doesn't grant us the luxury of perfect timing. No, Grace agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. It rarely does. I can't ask you to wait for me. That wouldn't be fair. You have a new life here, a fresh start. Grace studied their joined hands, then looked up into his storm-gray eyes. When Samuel died, I thought I'd never feel anything again except grief, but these past days with you. She took a deep breath. You helped me remember that life continues, that happiness is still possible. Grace, Archer murmured, his free hand moving to her cheek. I don't know what this feeling is between us, she continued, but I'd like the chance to discover it when it's safe for you to return. A smile spread across his face, warming his tired features. You're sure it could be months? I'm sure, Grace replied with growing confidence. I'll be here, teaching Hawthorne's children and waiting to hear that the Daniels brothers have been cleared of all charges. From outside came Thomas's low whistle, a warning. Their time was running out. I have to go, Archer said reluctantly. Wait. Grace hurried to her small desk and quickly wrote on a piece of paper. The address of my cousin in Boston. If you need to send word and don't want to risk a letter directly to me. Archer tucked the paper inside his shirt. I'll write when I can. He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers, a kiss that held both promise and farewell. Then he was gone, slipping out into the darkness with his brother. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustment and hard work. Grace threw herself into teaching, gradually earning the respect of both her students and their parents. She maintained a friendly distance from the town's eligible men, deflecting questions about her past with practiced vagueness. News of the Diamond D shootout rippled through the community. Sheriff Taylor, to his credit, presented a balanced account of events to the territorial authorities, emphasizing that the Caldwell men had been trespassing and armed. Still, with conflicting testimonies and the Caldwells' influence, the situation remained unresolved. 2 months after Archer's departure, the first letter arrived via Grace's cousin in Boston. Written in Archer's neat, precise hand, it informed her that they had reached Carson City safely and secured a hearing with Judge Hammond, known for his impartiality. The judge has ordered depositions from all parties involved, Archer wrote. It's a positive first step. Thomas is optimistic, which is saying something considering his usual outlook. The letter continued with personal reflections, inquiries about her teaching, and ended with a sentiment that warmed Grace's heart. Not a day passes that I don't think of you and our brief time together. Whatever happens with this legal matter, please know that my feelings remain unchanged. Grace replied immediately, sending her letter to the address he provided in Carson City. Thus began a correspondence that sustained both of them through the long separation letters filled with daily observations, deepening personal revelations, and a growing certainty that what had begun in those few days on the trail was something rare and precious. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. As Hawthorne prepared for winter, news arrived that Judge Hammond had ruled in the Daniels brothers' favor, finding that they had acted in self-defense against armed trespassers. The Caldwells were ordered to cease intimidation of smaller ranchers and to respect established water rights. It was a clear victory, but Archer's next letter explained that they couldn't return immediately. The Caldwells aren't men who accept defeat gracefully, he wrote. Thomas is selling the Diamond D to a cousin from Kansas. Once the sale is complete, we'll both be heading back to Hawthorne. The letter ended with a question that made Grace's breath catch. I know this is not how these things are traditionally done, but I find myself unwilling to wait another day without asking. If I were to return with a ring, would you consider becoming Mrs. Archer Daniels? On the first day of December 1878, as snowflakes drifted lazily past the schoolhouse windows, Grace dismissed her students early. A rider had brought news that morning 2 men had been spotted approaching town from the east. She stood on the schoolhouse porch, wrapped in her heaviest shawl, watching the main street. And then she saw them 2 riders emerging from the swirling snow. Even at a distance, she recognized Archer's straight-backed posture and the chestnut gelding he rode. The brothers stopped first at the sheriff's office, a formality to announce their return. Then Thomas headed toward the hotel while Archer continued on to the schoolhouse, his pace quickening as he spotted Grace waiting. He dismounted in a fluid motion that belied the months of healing his arm had required. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the distance of separation melting away like snow in sunshine. "You're here," Grace said finally, her voice catching. "I promised I would return," Archer replied, closing the distance between them. He looked older somehow, his face leaner, new lines around his eyes, but his smile was exactly as she remembered. "I received your letter," she said, "the one with the question." Archer reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box. "I've been carrying this since Carson City," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "I know our beginning was unconventional. I know it's been more letters than time together. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Grace stepped forward, snow gathering in her hair and on her shawl. "I was cast out once for loving someone society deemed wrong," she said softly. "What I've learned is that love isn't wrong when it's true. And what I feel for you, Archer Daniels, is the truest thing I've ever known." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Grace Zimmerman, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." As Archer slipped the ring onto her finger and drew her into his arms, Grace thought of that night in the desert when a stranger had offered kindness to a banished woman. "You loved true, that's no sin," he had said. In those simple words had been the beginning of healing, of hope. And now, in his embrace with snowflakes swirling around them, Grace knew she had found not just love again, but a partner who understood that loving with one's whole heart was never a sin, it was the greatest blessing life could offer.